Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Looks like we are live again for the second video in one single week. I think as we slowly approach the release of iOS 14, I'm going to try to do my best and put out more videos on how to build out our real-world applications using SwiftUI 2.0. And in today's video, I have a very interesting lesson for you guys. I'm going to be showing you guys how to build out this application in the middle of the screen here. And this is really useful because we're going to be building out a grid inside of a vertical scroll view. And then inside of our grid, right, we're going to be populating it with 3 columns. So column 1, 2, and 3. Hopefully you guys can see what's going on here. Inside of our grid right here, we have Disney, YouTube, and Tinder. We're going to be pulling down JSON data from Apple's kind of RSS feed. And that JSON data just helps us load all these applications right here, along with their title and release information down below. So this application is pretty complicated if you break everything down, but I'll show you guys how to build it. And it's actually very, very easy. So this is pretty good. Let me give a quick demo. If I search for Disney, right? Let's see, Disney right here. You'll see that it's just on the left column here. And then if I search for something like Roblox, you'll see we have 2 columns showing up like that. So pretty nice, pretty good. And hopefully you guys can follow along today. My voice is doing pretty good. Let me drag this in the top right corner. And I think, this application is pretty self-explanatory as to what we're going to be doing. So what that means is I am going to go ahead, head on to Xcode 12 and just create this app thing there. Why don't we say grid search LBTA for our product name. These are the defaults for Xcode 12, I believe. Hopefully they won't change too much. Just make sure you're on a UIKit or the SwiftUI app instead of the UIKit. I don't think it really matters, but this is what I'll be using. And I'll hit the create button there. Hopefully things are good. The volume right here looks okay. Let me just use the iPhone Pro Max. I don't like that guy on the right side. I don't like this on the left either, but you have your app file here. And we're going to be using the content view for the rest of today's video. So that's what I'm going to be using. I'm going to drag this in the corner and everything looks good. Some of you guys might be wondering what I'm looking at here, but I'm recording this whole thing using OBS on the left side. So that's what I'm staring into at in the corner. And basically you have your content view here, and we're going to be filling up content view with all of the grid that you see on the right side there. And we have our hello world. Let me confirm this stuff works. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. And, this isn't too complicated. Standard Swift UI code so far. One thing that I do recommend that you guys learn is the preview on the right side is extremely helpful. So I'll be doing everything in the preview today. It just makes your Swift UI development a lot faster. And let's kind of move on from here. I'm just going to create a navigation view. Hopefully I can do this. Let me put a scroll view here, and let me just move this up a little bit like that. And then once I do that, you'll see your scroll view. This guy's aligned to the top here. Navigation title and, grid search LBTA. Obviously, type in whatever you want, and you should be okay. We have our nav title right here. If you hit the play button, hopefully we can get the app to render out and get things moving on. So we have our scroll view that you can drag. If you don't hit the play, you can't really drag your component. So that's what I'll do. And now we are ready to construct our grid here. So the question is, how exactly do we construct a grid inside of SwiftUI? Well, I'm going to use a grid. There is the lazy H grid, but the one that we'll be using is a lazy V grid. The very first option that comes out is this columns, alignment, spacing, pin views, and content. It's pretty confusing, so why don't we use the one that's a little bit simpler at the bottom here. I don't like these comments that show up in the bottom here. I don't know exactly why those comments show up, but they do. Hopefully by the time you're using the new Xcode 12, it's cleaned up a little bit more. And the next thing we'll do is we are going to look at the right side. This is kind of confusing, so I'll remove the second placeholder. And now we'll have this weird placeholder thing there. This is kind of confusing, so why don't I remove this array? The grid expects you to pass in these column components, so let's remove that here, and now we have nothing. So let's kind of start from scratch here. Let me show you what a grid item is. Open this guy up. You have the spacing, the alignment, and also this size. You don't really need the spacing or the alignment, so I'll remove that for now, and I'll show you what those parameters do in just a moment. Just hit this right here. Hit dot, and you'll get adapted, fixed, and flexible. Personally, or honestly speaking, I'm not exactly sure what the adaptive does just yet, but fixed and flexible is really helpful. So let me illustrate what the fixed guy does here. And if you do 100, it looks like that. You can say the background of the color of red. And now you'll have a 100 here. Change this guy to 150. You should have 150, but it's not exactly showing up. So whenever you are kind of curious as to what's going on with your component, it's always good to use an H stack and just sandwich it inside of the spacers here. And I'll take the color and put it on the H stack instead. So now you'll see the full width of 150 for your actual H stack content inside of your grid. And I just like to do this because it helps me picture and visualize exactly how your components are rendered out inside of the screen. Something else that is helpful is to use a padding value. This way things just look a little bit better and it's easier to understand how things are rendered out. And that's pretty much what happens when you use one single grid item column right here. It's centered in the vertical axis. And like I was kind of mentioning earlier, I believe you can use the alignment of leading, and this should push it to the left side, but it's not doing that just yet because there's not enough components to push this to the left side. So that doesn't exactly work. But so far, this is what our grid is doing. And let's kind of move on to rendering out 3 columns in our grid right here. And what you are going to try to do is to create this right here and that right here. Just hit 3 columns, and we have this guy being pushed to the left side. And to make things a little bit easier, let me do a fix of 3 columns with 100 width. And now you can either copy and paste this a couple of times. Let me just do this once, and you'll see our second column appearing like that. And 3 is like that. Now the question is, what happens if I paste this one more time at the very bottom? Does it appear on the left side or does it appear below the first column, right? So I'll do that, and you'll see that right here, it appears on the bottom of this column right here. I believe one thing that you can do to make some spacing right here is to include that spacing parameter, and you can use 16, or I believe the default is 10 or 12, but basically the spacing allows this gap right over here. Hopefully you guys can see. And this looks pretty good, but obviously instead of having this stuff centered like this, we want it to be equally spaced out on the left, middle, and right column. And you have to kind of figure out how to do that. To make today's lesson easier, I want to remove all this stuff here. I don't like seeing all that code, and I would prefer to wrap everything inside of a more controllable for each loop. And let's see, I am going to render out 20 items inside of my for each loop. Let's just say number in like so. Let me cut that and put it inside of my for each loop. And now I can easily render out a bunch of items here. And everything looks pretty good. You can put the number inside of your text box if you really wanted to do so. Let me just show you how that is done. And now you'll have 0, 1, 2, 3, all the way up to 19 at the very bottom there. Okay, this is looking quite good. And now, what exactly do I want to move on to? Well, how do we make these columns here equally spaced out inside of our column, right? Or inside of our grid so that everything is aligned on the left, the center, and the middle for each column? Well, this is where the flexible column actually comes into play here. And so let me just wipe out this guy because I'm not going to be using fixed actually. Let me use this guy right here. You'll see spacing and alignment. And again, you don't really need this stuff. So let me just remove it and just hit dot and knit. With the flexible, let me say minimum is 100 and the maximum is something like 200 right here. And now you'll see that you have a one column inside of your grid. And then what you can do is to copy this and paste that and this right here. Let me make sure I get the right comment. And once you type in this right here, and you'll see that for the flexible grid item, everything is going to adjust itself accordingly so that you have 3 columns inside of your grid. You'll see I have the minimum and maximum of 100 and 200. And this just gives me, I think, some width of, I think it's about 130 or 140. It doesn't really matter. As long as you have the correct min and max values, everything should grow accordingly. All right, so study this for a couple of seconds while I get a drink here. All right, so now that we have our grid going, let me just fix the issue with the left and right padding values. So the way I'm going to do this is on my lazy V grid. Let's just type in the horizontal, and once you type in that, you'll get your horizontal padding. If you want to change the actual padding value to something like 12, that looks a little bit better. And I believe this right here. So this is actually a spacing value as well. And I think I can put it here. So spacing is 12, and that gives us spacing 12 here. Let's see, spacing 12. Okay, so again, this is how you render out a grid. This spacing, these two values control this and that. And the spacing right here actually controls this spot right here. So I just wanted you guys to kind of, understand exactly how the grid items work along with its spacing values. Most of the time, this is pretty much all the knowledge that you need for a grid component. So hopefully you guys understand what's going on so far. Okay, that being said, why don't we move on to the next part of today's lesson? And let's talk about rendering out these components here. The first thing I will do is to render out this text on the bottom along with this block at the very top for each one of my content components. And this is pretty easy, so I'll do this really quickly here. I'm just going to use, let's say, a VStack. So VStack looks like that, and you get your kind of red block right here. Text is the app title inside of your VStack. And now you have this text. I think this is some kind of release date. Release date is down below. You'll get this rendered out right here, hopefully. I'm on my Hackintosh, so this guy should be really fast. So the 2019 11/11 is the release date. And then we have the actual copyright information. So copyright is right below. You'll see everything appears really big. So you can just say this right here. I think it's something like 10, and the weight is maybe like semi-bold. I'm just typing this stuff out because the autocomplete is pretty terrible. So that's what I'll do. The alignment. So alignment is leading for my VStack. Just pushes everything to the left there. And this looks pretty good so far. Obviously, you guys can play with the font until you're happy. Let's use a 9 right here and use regular if you wanted to do that. And the copyright is maybe regular as well. And the font is appearing really small, so you might want to change it, but hopefully you guys can, configure it on your own time. And if you want to give this foreground color of maybe something like gray, you can do that as well. I don't really need the padding or the background color anymore, so I'll just remove that. And now your application pretty much looks like that right here. I think I actually want the background color. This way I can see what the bounds look like. And then now I should be okay. The next thing I will do is to render out this block at the very top. And this block, I'm just going to give it a frame of width right here. Let's give it 100 and a height of 100 as well. And why don't we give this the background of color dot blue. This way I can kind of see what's going on. And so this is what I have so far with my application. If I take the padding value back into the actual application, this is kind of what you get. Okay, so far I've rendered out my grid and some placeholder components inside of that grid. And now what I want to do is to, I actually want to pull down the JSON information from my API. So this is my grid here. Not sure why I can't really scroll it. So sometimes this guy is a little bit buggy, and once you play it, now you can scroll it again. So again, I want to pull down this information from the JSON API. And let me just show you what that JSON API looks like here. So if you go to this website, basically just Google like Apple JSON. I think it's like Apple JSON or RSS JSON like that. And just click on this guy here. I think I'm using iOS apps and, result limits of 100 or something. Copy this guy right here, new tab, paste that in here. And then you'll have this guy being rendered out. I'm using some kind of JSON formatter for Chrome. That's why it's being rendered out correctly inside of this format there. We have the entire component, which contains our feed right here. And then next, I'm actually looking at the results array. Everything inside of this grid is being rendered out as a single result. So for example, we have Warner Media, we have HBO Max right here, and we have the copyright information, and we have the artist name. We also have the app's name right here. And then next you have your next result, which kind of does pretty much exactly the same thing. We have Pokemon Go for the next result. So if you're not familiar with JSON rendering, this might be confusing, but basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a decodable object. Inside of that decodable, we'll have a feed that's also decodable. And then we'll have some kind of array of results, which is also decodable. Again, might sound confusing, but once you see the code, it's like really, really easy. So I will go ahead and do that. Why don't I just, let's see, when I do this, when I actually do the JSON decoding, I actually like to just copy this entire top chunk right here. And I will go ahead and move this guy out of the way. And now what I want to do is to actually parse out the JSON. Let's see, what do I want to do? So I'll paste that in here. And let me just comment this guy out. And this is my JSON, so I can see it. And this is my SwiftUI code. And so, before you actually get your JSON data, you actually have to talk about how you want to download the data and how to stuff it inside of your grid here. So currently the grid is rendering out 20 components here. So let's put this to 0 to 10, hit the resume. You'll see this guy is going to have 10 grid items or 10 blocks inside of it now. So how does this work, right? Like, how do we actually download this JSON data and then put it inside of this like for each loop? How does that work? Well, to make things easy to understand, let me just type in the code, I guess. Usually when you want to download some data, wait for that data in some kind of async process, And then once you get your data, you want your collection view or you want your grid to load that data. Most of the time, the easiest way to do this is to actually use an observable object. So observable object right here, a really hard word to say, but I'm going to use this as my view model. So I'm just going to type in grid view model. If you're familiar with what a view model is, this might be a little easier to understand, but just ignore the view model wording for now. This is actually pretty simple. I'm going to use an initializer, and I'm not going to do anything in it just yet. I'm going to use a publish variable var, and let's say items like that. And for the items, let me just copy this guy right here. So take that inside of there. This just gives an array of 0 to 9. And then what I'll do is down below inside of my content view, right? I'm going to utilize this grid view model. And the way you actually observe changes inside of a grid view model or any view model object is to use observed object and just say var VM stands for view model, obviously. And I'm going to create my view model like that. And then for my for each loop, right, I'm going to use VM dot items like this. So because my view model items is still 0 to 10, you don't see any changes. I'm going to modify that to 0 and 5. And now I'm going to hit resume. And because my for each loop down below right here is now looking at my view model items object, you'll see it's 0 to 5 right here. And this means I have 5 cells, 5 items inside of my grid. So that's pretty much how that works. And to simulate my, what's the right word, async JSON download process, what I'm going to do is to use a timer and schedule a fake timer right here. And so this is my Json decoding simulation. And for this guy, let's just use a time interval of 2 seconds. Don't repeat, hit enter here, underscore, don't care about the timer. And you can say items equals 0, 0, 0, dot, let's see, 15. So 0 dot dot less than 15 gives you 0 to 14. And this guy right here says item in a closure requires a self block here. Okay, so what you can see is that after 2 seconds, I'm going to hit the resume, right? Once the whole process is kicked off, renders out and 1, 2, and now after the fake JSON decoding, you'll see that now everything is 0 to kind of 15 right here, giving me about 14 to 15 items. So what this example illustrates is I want to actually perform the JSON download right here. Once it's done, the grid can actually render out the correct JSON information. And hopefully this is pretty easy to understand. Next thing I will do is to actually download this JSON data here. So again, how do I want to download the JSON data? Well, what I was mentioning earlier is that I'm going to create a huge container object. Inside of that container object, let me pull back the JSON formatted text here. It makes it easier to understand. So I have a feed, and inside of my feed, I'll have an array. So this is an array of results objects. And yeah, I don't think I want to mention anything else about that because the code is easier to understand. I don't really care about this stuff so much. I just care about the results array. So let me just remove that to make things just a little bit easier on the eyes here. Okay, so again, I want to create some JSON objects. And how do I want to do this? So typically you create your JSON decodables as structs. So I'll use that here. Let's just say feed, and this guy will be a decodable. You can use codable as well, but I'll use this for now. And let's see, the next thing I will do is create this feed object, which is a feed like that. So I think I want to create maybe RSS. Yeah, that's an okay name. So RSS requires this feed to also be decodable. And so struct this right here, feed is decodable like that. Once you have this, these two errors will go away. And then for my feed, right, I know that my feed contains an array of these results objects. So I'll do that as well. So results is like some kind of result object. And this is actually the apps that you're going to render out inside of your grid. So you can call this app if you want to. It doesn't really matter what you call these guys, as long as you have the keys correct. So this is the key, and this is also the key. And then finally, you can have the struct right here. App is also a decodable. And now, why don't I pull this in here? No, I won't be able to see that. Okay, so I'm gonna pull that right in the corner right here. And hopefully you guys can see it. I'm going to render out a couple of things inside of my app. And for the app, I'm going to grab the actual, let's see, the copyright is that. And then the name, so I'm just looking at this right here. So the copyright and the name. I believe I want the artwork URL 100, so I'll copy that in as well. And then finally, if we want to get the release date, we can do that as well. So luckily, all this stuff is a string type. So I'm going to put it all as string type here. Okay, that looks pretty good. I'll move this guy out of the way. And now what I want to do is I'm going to decode all of the JSON objects inside of this chunk of the code. The way to do this is quite easy. Let's see, you're gonna want to do everything in a do catch block because the JSON decoder requires that. So JSON decoder.decode is this right here. I'm going to decode using rss.self like that. And then I need some kind of data. So this data is actually the data coming from the URL loading. And you know what I mean is you want to use a URL session session.share.data with some kind of completion handler here. Let's see, so this is just standard code. I'm not going to go through this stuff too much. Garlet URL equals some kind of URL with a string of this. I'm going to grab it from this guy here. So this is the URL, just grab that. And you know, this is standard stuff, so I will just blaze through this as fast as possible. So this is the URL, completion header is there, data response and error, check response status and the actual error. Okay, make sure to resume this guy. I'm going to cut that in here. And this looks pretty good so far. What else do I want to do here? I think I want to do a try and let RSS equals that. So RSS equals that. And I think I want to use the data from here. So this is the data and that looks pretty good. I think I want to take the do catch and put it inside of this guy instead. So do that right here, cut that. And now I should be good to go. Here's our print, fail to decode. And just by default, you get this error variable if something happens right here. So I will take that. And now I can try to run this inside of the code here. This data right here comes back as optional, so let me fix that. Garlet data equals data and else return, and all of the code should be okay. All right, let's say print RSS object right here. I'm going to now run this inside of my iPhone Pro simulator, which is down here. And everything should be okay. Let me see what my errors are. And so this guy right here. Okay, so inside of the Xcode 12, you have a app variable already declared. So you can't really call things apps anymore, which I used to do a whole lot. So I'm going to take the result right here and or the app and just rename it as the result. And now I can run it inside of this simulator here. And what I'm expecting to actually see is something being printed out inside of the console down below. So, you know, you load your URL, you have your session, make sure to call resume. I forget about this all the time, so I make sure to put it there. Once you have your RSS decoded, it's going to print it all out inside of the bottom right here. You'll see that you'll have your feed object, which is Let's see, scroll back up. You have your copyright, you have your name, you have your artwork URL 100, and then it's this URL down below right here. So that's pretty much how the JSON decoding is performed. I think most of you guys understand how that works already, so I will move on and try to illustrate how to render this stuff inside of my grid right now. So let's see. You see at the very end on line 64, I'm grabbing everything inside of this RSS object here, right? And the grid is actually rendering out this items array inside of this for each there. And what I want to do really is, instead of using this items array, what I want to do is I'm going to capture this rss.feed.results as my items. In other words, I'm going to do this here. So publish Xcode. The autocomplete is pretty terrible. So I'm going to say var, and this is my apps. Let's see, apps is okay, I think, and you can just say result right here. So basically the result object is this guy, contains these couple of properties, and apps is looking like that. Maybe I'll call this results to be a little more consistent. And this is just a empty array for now. At the very end, once I actually grab my object right here, I can say self.results equals rss.feed.results. And that's basically this object here, feed right here, contains this results, and you get your array like so. And then once I'm done with that, I'm going to, instead of using items on my view model object here for my for each loop, I'm going to use the result instead. And once you do that, you can try to run, but because results right here, click on that, it requires your result to conform to hashable. So to make this easier, I'll just do that right up here. So hashable does that. And once you do that, you have your code, which looks like this. You can run it again. And once your application loads up, it's going to wait a little bit to download the JSON information. Once you have that information downloaded, it's going to load it inside of your grid like this. And you'll see it has a ton of items inside of it. And that's pretty much how we load our data inside of our grid using a view model. Next thing I want to do is for the actual results, the for each loop here, we have these couple of text components below, and it's just rendering out this app title thing right here. And what I actually want to do is I want to, instead of using app title, the placeholder, I'm going to use the actual application inside of this results array. So this right here just represents one of these objects here. I'm going to use, I think I can use app.name. And once you kind of see what's going on here, we have HBO Max and we have release date and then the gray below. So this is pretty self-explanatory. Release date is here. You'll see the release date show up. And then finally, we're going to want to do the copyright as well. And that is looking pretty good so far. Last thing I want to do is maybe I want to align everything correctly inside of my grid. I think the alignment might be helpful now. So this stuff is kind of tricky sometimes. I don't exactly know what it does half the time, so I just try it, and kind of through trial and error, I can figure out how SwiftUI 2.0 is now working. Okay, I think I actually want to do, let's see, this is right here. Let me just type it out. Top is here. And then finally, I think I can do this right here as well. Alignment top. Okay, so now everything is aligned at the very top of our grid. Again, I don't think I need the background color, so I'll remove it now. Everything is looking a little bit better. Okay, so far not too bad. For my VStack, why don't I include some spacing as well? Spacing of 4, I think that gives me something a little bit easier to visualize here. And then now what I might want to do is, I don't want this padding, so let me just use the horizontal. I think that's a little bit better. And so that was okay. We have spacing right here. And then the last thing we pretty much have to talk about is the image inside my grid, right? So how do I render out the image for the actual application? I'm going to move this out of the way. And we have the Disney, YouTube, Tinder, so on and so forth. The way to render out images inside of SwiftUI, it's kind of difficult if you're just using plain old SwiftUI native. I don't want to type in a lot of code. So what I typically do is I go inside of my project right here and I add in these frameworks or third-party frameworks using this option here. This UI changes a lot, so I wouldn't be surprised if it doesn't look like this anymore later on. So somehow you want to use the SPM Swift Package Manager downloader thing here. And what I typically do is I use the KingFisher package. So you can just say Swift and KingFisher right here. Type in that, hit on that. Just grab this URL, github.com, 1vcat, an excellent developer. I believe he is Chinese. And just paste that in here and click on next. It's going to download it. Just use the first option there, or just use the master branch, whatever you want. It's going to fetch the actual code from GitHub. That's what it's doing right now, checking it out. Takes a little bit of time if you have a slow connection, but I'm going to click on KingFisher SwiftUI there. And then finally, you can hit the finish. It'll show up here as well as this on the left side. This is just a better version of CocoaPods, I believe. You can look at the sources down here. But that's not too interesting for today's video, so I'll go ahead and go back to our application here. I'm going to now go inside of my for each block right here. And then for the actual spacer that contains a blue background, I'm going to be using an image instead. So the image, it's going to require you to load the actual image data. And that image data is going to come from the actual JSON objects. So let me just click on this. We'll have HBO Max. So, that's where the data is coming from. And what I'll do is I actually have that information inside of this app object. So to make this easier, I'll just import KingFisher SwiftUI. So typically you want to move this to the top of your file, but I'll just put that there for now. I'm going to use KF image. This guy has the URL constructor. URL is a string, and you can say app.art, artwork, URL 100. I believe that should work. I think I might be typing in. Okay, so syntax highlighting is back. And now I'm going to hit resume. You're going to see the grid looking very wonky. And this is kind of what it looks like so far. It looks pretty gnarly. And the reason why it's doing this is because by default, SwiftUI doesn't know exactly how large your images are. And the image is actually pretty big, so that's why things are looking like that. You can just type in .resizable and things should fix themselves up a little bit here. I believe the scale to fit actually makes it respect the normal aspect ratio. Things are looking like that. I don't need this spacer anymore, so I'll just remove that. And things are starting to look a lot better. So I think that you might be able to use scale.fill. And once you do that, things are going to look a little bit nicer here. And, not so bad. To get the actual spacing to respect the stuff on the right side, you might want to change this guy right here. So let's see, the padding is right here. I believe the spacing needs to be something like 16. That gives me that. Okay, so everything with our application on the right side is looking pretty good so far. I'm going to try to fix the spacing issue that I'm seeing right here. The middle doesn't have the gap that I want. So here's what I'll do. I have the code for the completed application on the off-screen area right here. I'm going to replace the actual rows using this right here. And something else that I will apply is the alignment of leading like so. And we'll just have that. It, for some reason, allows me to render out my application looking like that. I don't really care about the horizontal anymore, so I'll remove that as well. And everything with my application is looking a little bit better. I have my gap right here, and things are looking okay. And the next thing I will do is to, I'm just going to give my KF image a corner radius as well. So corner radius of 22 allows me to round off my actual image right here. I don't really want to use scale to fill, so I'll just use scale to fit. And now my application looks like that. So far so good. I'll pump in the alignment of top again. And now things are going to look pretty much perfect now. All right, so the top is like that. The last column should go up to the very top. And if you don't have your alignment correct, usually it's due to some kind of spacer issue. So the VStack contains your image, your text, and now at the very bottom, it has your spacer down at the very bottom section of your VStack. It's a little hard to explain why it's doing that, but you know, just take my word for it and add your spacer and you should be fine. Okay, that being said, if you want to fix the spacing issues inside of your VStack right here, you can also, you know, add the padding of top of maybe 4. That's going to push the text down just a little bit from the actual app icon here. Okay, this is looking pretty good. As you can see, as you drag up and down, your applications are being rendered out. And if you want to get the search box going here, you might have to do some things. And this video is getting a little bit long, so I'll maybe include that in another video. Hopefully you guys can see using the grid, the lazy V grid in SwiftUI right now, you can just render out columns inside of a vertical scroll view like very easily. Your code looks super clean right here. I do recommend that you clean this up just a little bit here. And one way to clean this up is to extract this guy. You can just cut this or use this call action thing or code action. I'm not really sure how useful this is, but extract subview puts it down here. And again, I'm not really sure how useful it is, but you can say the app info is like that. And then for the app info, it's actually missing the app. So I'll pop it in right here. You can say let app equals one of your result objects like that. And then once you have that, you'll require yourself to put that in here. And this is the actual app. Again, that's a result object, but you know, you can call this whatever you want and you should be fine. Once you do that, you can see that when you come back to your code, right, it's just much easier to look at, easier for others to maintain as well. And just all around, just extracting your subviews as a separate component is a win. Okay, nothing too bad. Again, when you're downloading data asynchronously, from the internet using most likely some kind of JSON object, you're going to want to use a view model. Now, the usefulness of the view model comes inside of this initializer object, because if you think about it, right, where are you going to download your data inside your SwiftUI view object? Like, there's no real initializer inside of this code. Like, you can try to use the onAppear to download some code right here, but every time it appears, you're going to download the data again, and you don't exactly want to do that. You want to have one safe place to download your data, and typically this happens inside of your view model now. Once you have that safe area, right, you fire off the download data, you get the JSON object, do whatever you want to do with it, usually is some kind of JSON decoder, and then you want to grab a hold of that object, and once you have some kind of array that you want to render out inside of your for each, you want to put that array as a publish variable right here. Now, you can remove this publish. Sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. I'm going to remove it, and I wouldn't be surprised if it works, but it should render out nothing. And there you go. So when a variable is just plain old var like this, whenever it changes, right, it doesn't notify the actual observer. In this case, our observer is down here. We marked it as our observer using this observed object. And so once the observer gets notified of it, it tells it, okay, what is looking at this observed view model object? Well, this for each is using it to render itself out. So I'm notified that it changed. So this block of the SwiftUI element tree, UI tree, is going to re-render itself out, giving you your newly downloaded JSON objects. So you just have to remember this pattern. Basically, you need to get new data, observe what happens, and whenever the data changes through some kind of published variable, it's going to re-render everything out inside of the iOS application. Again, make sure to keep your published annotation, and you can also, I believe it's called a property wrapper. And again, the property wrappers are very important. Sometimes if you forget the publish or observed object, you're going to be wondering why your application's not rendering anything out. So like this right here, I'm going to undo, and now my observed object is back. I hit the resume right here. You'll see that everything is working correctly yet again inside of my application. And yeah, this process makes your code really clean. I don't need my items anymore. Now everything is done using two separate objects. Again, allowing you to sort of separate the concerns of your application inside of the correct modules. So view model and your view is down below. Typically you want to rename this following the actual view model. So I'll call this the grid view, or maybe the app grid view, and modify this as well. So that's going to wrap it up for today's lesson. One day I'll learn what the adaptive grid item column does, but using flexible will get you 99% of the way there. I rarely use the fixed size grid item, but sometimes you need it, sometimes you don't. But basically that's what you get. One thing that you might want to use the fixed item for is if you have three flexible items right here, and maybe you want the left column to be fixed size, you can modify this to be fixed right here, and you can just give it maybe 50, and that looks good. I'm going to, let's see, I believe I need one more. All right, Command Option P to resume. And let's see, is this going to allow me to render this guy out? Let me see what is going on wrong right here. So the content view has changed, and I am going to use this right here. So content view, let's bring that guy back. And inside of the other file, it's still looking at the content view, so I'll remove that. And once you have some kind of grid that has a fixed size, you'll see that the left component right here is now 50, right? Obviously. And sometimes when you're building out some fancier UI design, you'll want one column to be fixed, and then the other columns will fill out the rest of the horizontal space. And using this bit of code will allow you to do that. And this is just one of the possible configurations that you can have. And I think I'm done talking for today. If you want to download the code, you can find the link down in the description below. Hopefully you found this stuff helpful. If you guys have another challenge or some kind of idea that you want to see fleshed out in full SwiftUI code, I'll be more than happy to do it. I am working on like a couple of different consulting projects right now at the same time, which does keep me quite busy. But during the pandemic, keeping busy is actually a pretty good thing because you can't really go outside and do anything anyways. Staying at home coding is a pretty decent way to pass the time. It does get a little bit boring every once in a while, but now that hopefully, or at least in California, things are looking kind of on the up and up. Things are improving just every week. It feels like more and more lockdown restrictions are being kind of removed. We can eat in restaurants and dine in, or kind of semi dine in, and you can there's outdoor seating right now where you can eat outside, which is kind of considered dining in. But yeah, that's our situation in terms of the pandemic so far. Don't ask me when the pandemic is going to be over, but at the very least, we have Apple releasing iOS 14, which is very interesting. SwiftUI is something that I'm using just in pretty much every project that I work on right now for these contracting gigs. I noticed that in terms of the difference between UIKit and SwiftUI, when I'm developing a SwiftUI application, right, things are just moving so much faster. I would say like 10 times faster. And the main reason is because whether or not you're using the storyboard or UIKit programmatic layout, all of that code that requires you to set up your UI and then run your application, okay, this thing changed, gotta change the font size or whatever. All that, the iteration of your UI just takes so much time. And now that we have SwiftUI, the preview, like you don't have to waste your time on that anymore. Something else that's also very helpful is the idea of these observed objects and these published variables, because you no longer have to use these add target action like UIKit hooks inside of your UI. And no longer am I dealing with all these unnecessary bugs that are, just a developer being lazy and not watching your UI change along with your data. All my data is now managed by the published observable objects. And whenever something changes, the code handles it for me. I don't have to write the manual code that deals with those code changes. So yeah, those are just two of the major reasons why I'm using SwiftUI now. And again, just using it makes my life a lot easier. And right now, I find myself enjoying SwiftUI development so much more. Kind of find the passion of writing code again. And also, I think a lot of you guys will enjoy SwiftUI as well. Moving forward, I will mostly be doing SwiftUI content. Maybe I shouldn't say this, but whenever I have to develop a UIKit style application again, I have no desire in writing UIKit code anymore. It's just either the storyboard or programmatic layouts is so painful. So that's a bit of code I don't want to write anymore. But maybe that's a topic left for another video that I'll do. And yeah, enough rambling. I'll see you guys maybe in the next lesson. Bye-bye.